worked for IBM, and like I remember earlier conversations, you in the Linux kernel context and Linux kernel community context, you were talking about how IBM is successful and how the company got this whole investing in open source right. And you're not the only person that I heard this from. So I would like to dive a little bit further into what what was the difference in the case of IBM? Because there are several other companies, both in the Linux kernel and then overall in the open source ecosystem, who didn't really get this whole how to rely on open source right. So, what did it take within IBM to get to the point where the company was able to sustainably invest in the Linux kernel upstream and use the open source code and just have that whole loop figured out?
So a lot of that happened before I was there. And I'll call out Dan Fry as the guy who did it right. He convinced management that this was going to work. And they made the bet. IBM made the bet. They put, what they say, $1 billion into it.
$1 billion, yep.
Yeah. So IBM's in the business of selling hardware and services, right? So they want to sell chips or systems. And I was there, they made the very good pitch to some people saying, you can buy our hardware, this platform, or this platform, or this platform, and your same program runs on all of them because it's running on Linux. And this is the first time that they had ever had a cross-hardware platform solution so that they could sell to a small person their x86, their Intel boxes, their bigger systems, the S390 mainframes, which are amazing and run Linux wonderfully. And that's always the future of whatever Linux is doing. It's what those guys are doing. Or the PowerPC stuff in the middle. It was you could pick and choose whatever, and so they made a very commanding bet on that here we can provide something that's cheaper because you couldn't make an operating system ecosystem for that price, and that would work for everybody. And it also helped put their competitors out of business. So it was a pretty wise move. So they had management buy-in. And I think that's the key. You have to have management buy-in that this is going to be something to do. I see a lot of companies, it's like the engineers want to do something, and then some of the middle managers want to do that, but it stops at a little bit level. Or you have the upper management wanting to do it, and then you have the engineers wanting to do it, but it gets stuck in the middle. Somewhere else doesn't want to do that. Because no one person in the middle wants to take the hit on the initial cost that's going to take for their product. It needs a management top-down for the whole company to buy into this stuff. IBM had that at the time. And they did a good job, and they made their money back. They publicly said it was a business decision, and we made money on it. And IBM makes great money on services now. They don't have as large a Linux kernel team. They still, for some portions of it, do, but they've changed over time as well. Intel has a big Linux kernel system. They used to have none. Then there's other companies like Google has huge kernel divisions that don't contribute anything to upstream, and they suffer for those different parts of the division. But Android has a very, very tiny kernel team and has a huge impact on the ecosystem because they work with upstream. So it's like if you look at it, because the Android management team understands this, they can get their home, they can do so much more for so much less energy and less resources. So again, it takes management buy-in to do this type of stuff. And that's rare for a lot of companies. Or some companies just want to burn the money. So Qualcomm famously wanted to burn the money because they had it in order to keep their ecosystem of not working upstream until after it was too late. They've now changed that because maybe they don't have so much money to burn. But they publicly admitted that now we're willing to take the hit and the cost to do that. And that was their management decision to do so. It wasn't their engineers. They didn't necessarily like that. So that made it hard for engineers who wanted to work with the ecosystem or the infrastructure to work for them. So when you are a management and you are able to work with upstream and you support your engineers to do that, you open yourself up to a much larger pool of talent to work for you. And they're going to be working for Linux to do the betterment for it, solve your problems, but they'll do that upstream. But that lets you get so much access to much better engineers than you ever had before. There is some companies that famously do not work upstream. And we say, if you are a Linux kernel person, then you don't like working upstream, because some people don't. I mean, that was common at IBM when you had that happen. Some people just did not want other people critiquing stuff. Go work for those companies. So we'll point them at those companies over there. And we all know who those companies are, and I won't say. But there's a place for everybody if you want to work with Linux stuff. But again, management buy-in takes the key. I have a fun story that I told before. Chip company that did Wi-Fi drivers or Wi-Fi chips. They sold chips. They had out-of-tree Wi-Fi drivers, big giant monstrosities. And the CTO of the company said, "We want this stuff in the kernel. We need to get this stuff in the kernel." And then it just wasn't happening. Something was mismatched. The engineers weren't sending it. Something wasn't going on. So I went and visited them over in Asia, spent a day talking to them, and it was like no feedback loop at all. Just talking. Here's how the ecosystem works. Here's how everything's good. Lunch break happened. A bunch of people left. I stayed and ate lunch with the engineers. And one of the engineers said, the reason why we're not allowed to do this is because the original code base was written by the CTO. And our managers are really worried that if the code gets submitted to the kernel, that the community is going to rip it out. And that would be not saving face for the CTO, the cultural thing that, his code was wrong or something. And they want to preserve the CTO's original code. And I went and told the CTO, because the CTO is the one who brought me in. He said, "Hey, come and do this." And he's like, "What? I didn't know that. My code was horrible. Of course I don't want this stuff in there. You should rip it out. I'm not a good engineer. I started the company a long, long time ago." So and then he had to go down and tell his managers, that whole middle chunk of managers, it's okay. We need this done. Let our engineers actually go work in the stuff. So there was a big cultural mismatch there in the middle that you had to drive through in order to make it happen. Now they're working in the community, works great, and all is good. But it took again, it's just people. It's a people problem, and it's a management buy-in and agreeing why this needs to happen. And so it can be done. It's hard. It's something like that. But you also
and a fortuitive lunch, right?
Fortuitive lunch, yeah.
Because otherwise, everybody would have nodded while you did all of that presentation, and nothing would have ever changed.
Nothing would have changed. Yeah, I got lucky there. I don't know any other ones that did that.